Now, moving on to Rancor. Rancor is another perk similar to Noed in that it does generally give you easy kill towards the end of the game. What Rancor does is, at the end of the game, whoever your obsession is will become one shot to you, no matter what. And if you can down them, right away there on the ground, you can mori them, just like Devour Hope lets you do. Except Rancor only applies to that one person, your obsession. Now, as I said before, you can use something like Furtive Chase or Nemesis to try and get several hits out of Rancor. So you might be able to get 2, 3 Moris. Getting 4 Moris out of Rancor, well, getting even more than 1 Mori out of Rancor is very uncommon. But it is definitely a good challenge if you're looking for one. Now, aside from that, Rancor also has an effect very similar to Bitter Murmur. What it does is whenever a generator is done, all the survivors on the map scream for a split second. And it's very similar to Bitter Murmur in that whenever the generator gets done, you automatically have information. Now, it is different because it doesn't actually show you if they're running a certain way, if they're trying to hide. It just shows you where they are at that split second that the generator got done. But the advantage it has over Bitter Murmur is it works map wide. Somebody could be doing a generator in one corner of the map, and if somebody's hiding in the opposite corner, you'll see where both those guys are. So Rancor as a whole, it's a pretty strong perk, honestly. It helps you a lot with tracking, and it does give you a free kill at the end of the game if you can keep your obsession alive until then. So definitely a good one to consider. Remember Me is, it used to be a lot better. I don't really know why they nerfed it. I don't think they ever really needed to nerf Remember Me. I think it was a perfectly fine perk because it was before. But what Remember Me does is whenever you smack your obsession with a regular attack, it'll give you 1 stack. And it'll keep building up stacks all the way to 4. Again, similar to Furtive Chase, similar to Barbecue and Chili, it'll go all the way up to 4 stacks. And for every stack you have on Remember Me, whoever isn't the obsession will take an extra 4 seconds per stack to open the door. So if you have all 4 of them, it'll take a regular survivor 36 seconds to open a door as opposed to the regular 20. Now, this doesn't apply to the obsession, so something you can try and consider with Remember Me is you want to get your 4 hits right away, and then maybe you can just kill off your obsession and you won't have to worry about somebody opening the gates faster than everyone else. So definitely a big thing to consider there. Remember Me works really well with Blood Warden in trying to set up for an endgame play, something with perhaps even with Noed as well. It just creates a really good situation towards the end of the game where you can make it so that it'll take a lot longer to open the doors. But you got to keep in mind, generally when survivors are opening doors, they're in a pretty good spot anyway. So these extra 16 seconds don't generally come into play too often, unfortunately. Now, save the best for last. This is another one of my personal favorite perks. It's extremely fun to use once you get it. It's once you start getting the stacks up. What happens is whenever you have save the best for last equipped, every time you hit somebody that isn't the obsession, you'll start gaining stacks. It's very similar again, like to Remember Me, to Bitter Murmur, to Barbecue. You start gaining tokens, the stacks, and the more stacks you have, the faster your successful hit cooldown will be. So essentially what that means is if you smack a survivor with save the best for last, your next one will be 1 stack faster, each stack meaning 5%. So the next time you hit a survivor, it'll be 5% faster. Then when you hit the next survivor, it'll be 10% faster, and that'll stack all the way up to 40% faster. Now, this is on normal attacks, so nothing like the Demogorgon charge or a Huntress hatchet or something like that, like a chainsaw. Those don't count. As long as it's just a regular R2 attack, M1 attack, whatever you want to call it, it'll give you a stack as long as you're not hitting the obsession. Now, if you do hit the obsession, you'll end up losing 2 stacks at level 3, but at level 1 you'll lose 4 stacks. So at level 3, I've always been of the mind that in most situations it isn't that necessary to try and avoid the losing stacks. But once you started going to the lower levels to save the best for last, then losing stacks is really impactful because you'll lose a lot more at a time. So essentially, we'll save the best for last. A strategy you can use is you can run a killer like Demogorgon, for example, who has that ability to kill somebody without having to consume a stack. So he can just go around, if he's chasing the obsession, just smack them, just hit them normally, and whenever he finds the obsession, that's when he can go in for the lunge attack to make sure that he isn't consuming his successful hit stacks. Now, the successful hit stacks only apply to the regular attacks. So if you're using the lunge from Demogorgon, if you're using the lunge from Pig, for example, that cooldown doesn't apply to them in that situation, but it does let you use those attacks to try and keep the pressure up, try and keep your stacks up as high as possible. Now, Shadowborne. This is a very, very simple perk. Uh, all it does is it makes your field of view 15 degrees wider. That's literally it. It doesn't change ever. It doesn't change anything about the gameplay aside from your field of view. This is a perk a lot of nurses use because on killers like Nurse, on killers like Spirit, what you want to be doing is finding people as quickly as possible and killing them right away. You don't necessarily need stuff like gen regression perks or even chase perks that much. All you really need on killers like that are tracking perks, and that's at its core what Shadowborne is. This is not a perk I would recommend to somebody not that comfortable on killer because it doesn't do anything for you. If you want a slightly higher FOV, field of view, you can use Monitor and Abuse. Get that 10 degrees wider. Instead of 15, it's only 10, but you also get that extra sneak up factor of the 8 degrees less, or sorry, the 8 meters less of your turn radius. Now, Spies from the Shadows. This used to be a pretty bad perk, but recently it's been buffed, and it's really good now, actually. It's one of the better tracking perks in the game, in my opinion. Whenever whenever you play a game, you might notice that there's a bunch of crows all over the map, and the better you get with Killer, the more you'll realize, hey, if there's a crow 30 meters ahead of me that just landed, that probably means that somebody was near there recently. Because whenever survivors run, they disturb crows. Whenever killers move, they disturb crows. Now, whenever you're out in the world and you hear a crow fly away. Like I said, that's part of the tracking in the game. Spies from the Shadow just makes it that much easier to realize when crows are moving. Whenever you hear a crow, or sorry, whenever a crow flies away within 36 meters of you, then it'll tell you exactly where it was. It'll make a little noise and it'll tell you exactly where it was every single time. So if there's if there's a Nia out in the fields like 28 meters away from you, she disturbs a crow, you'll know exactly where she was when she disturbed the crow. So what this perk does is it basically just lets you follow people around even if you don't see them. So it's a really good tracking perk if you have a hard time trying to figure out where survivors are while you're chasing them. Now, Surveillance. This is another perk that used to be pretty bad, but with its recent buffs, it's actually really solid now. What Surveillance does is whenever you kick a generator, it'll it'll actually highlight that generator yellow. It'll highlight that generator white, and all the way down until it keeps regressing to 0%. It'll stay white, and I'm not sure if it's still bugged, but at some point it has been bugged so that it would stay white even after it hits 0%. I'm not sure if that's been patched yet. But essentially what that does is whenever that generator is white, if a survivor jumps back on the generator, it'll turn yellow. It won't actually make a noise for you, similar to Discordance. It'll just it'll just turn yellow, and if you happen to notice it, you know that somebody just got on that generator. On top of that, it also makes it so that people repairing generators make noises 8 meters further out. It doesn't make them any louder, but you can hear them from 8 meters further away, which does let you get that little bit of extra information during the game. But of course, generally you want to use it for the tracking ability. So on a killer like Spirit, for example, who can't see auras in her ability, if you're in her ability and you see a generator go yellow, you know somebody's there. It doesn't matter if you can't see exactly where they are. You know they're at that generator at some point, so you can use your ability to get there instead. Territorial Imperative is another pretty bad perk, except for very specific situations. This perk, whenever somebody goes into a generator or into the basement rather, their aura will be highlighted for 3 seconds. Sorry, if somebody goes into the basement and you're 32 meters away, their aura will be highlighted for 3 seconds and it'll make a little noise. And that way you'll be able to tell, hey, somebody's going into the basement. Now, this generally isn't that helpful because in a lot of situations, people go into the basement when they know that somebody else is getting chased or getting hooked or whatever it may be. But what this does work with is the Demogorgon. The Demogorgon especially. It does work with the Hag as well in certain situations. But what the Demogorgon can do is he can leave a trap at the top, or sorry, he can leave a portal at the top of the basement. And whenever he hears Territorial Imperative, he can hook somebody in the basement, leave a trap on top of the basement, and then whenever he hears Territorial Imperative go off, he can go straight back to that portal, and by the time the unhook is happening, he's appeared, and generally, the Demogorgon will appear late enough so that his undetectable time will actually take up the time that the survivor was using to unhook, so you generally won't run into borrowed time as much with this perk, or with that setup for Demogorgon. Another great combo to pair with it is make your choice, again, on the Demogorgon. If you're 32 meters away, make your choice is already going to be activating. If you know somebody's going in there, you can just teleport straight back in. Whenever they unhook, whoever is healthy running out of the basement will immediately be one shot to you, and you can just take him out just like that. So definitely a lot of potential outplay, or a lot of potential situations where territorial can be good, but it's extremely situational. So whenever you do use it, I generally suggest using it on Hag or the Demogorgon. Now, Thanatophobia, I've talked about this perk several times now, and what it does is whenever it does there's something very similar to Dying Light, where however many people are injured, it doesn't actually give you stacks in game, but it's generally what people do tend to call it. They give you stacks. So for each injured person, you can consider them one stack towards Thanatophobia. And essentially what that means is for every injured person, they'll have a 4% slower generator speed, healing speed, and I believe as well um, sabotaging speed. So it basically just slows the game down a little bit. It isn't really the best. It isn't really the best perk for slowdown on its own. But like I said, for you can pair it with other perks like Pop Goes the Weasel, like Thanatophobia, like Sloppy Butcher, and eventually all of those debuffs to the generator speeds, to the healing speeds, will start stacking up, and it'll start causing survivors a lot to try and heal themselves or do generators. This is another one of those perks that encourages survivors to heal themselves as well. So they might end up spending a lot of time healing, which it's always great for you, or it's almost always great for you when survivors heal up. Because if survivors are healing, they're not doing generators, which is good for you. You want the survivors to be on generators as little as possible. Now, Thrilling Tremors. This is probably one of the best perks to combo with Pop Goes the Weasel. Essentially, what this perk does is whenever you pick somebody up, every generator that isn't being worked on at the moment will be blocked off by the entity for 16 seconds and highlighted in white. So what this means is when you pick somebody up, you can take a quick look around. If you see any generators that are red, that means that somebody is on that generator. Which means if you have Pop Goes the Weasel, you can go over there and kick it whenever they get off because you're obviously coming over to the generator. So it's similar to barbecue in that it lets you know where to go after you hook somebody, but it does block off generators for 16 seconds as well. So like I said, that's more time survivors aren't on the generators. That's better for you in the long haul. So next we have Tinker. And man, this perk used to be overpowered. It used to actually just straight up help your cooldowns as killer, which was insane. You could, that's what people used to call Instasaw for Hillbilly and Leatherface, and well, that's basically what it was, an instant saw. But it's been nerfed a long time ago. So now, whenever a generator is repaired to 85%, it'll give you a notification of where they are, and it'll take away your heartbeat for 12 seconds. It'll give you the undetectable status. So essentially, you can, whenever a generator is at 8%, you can just go right up to that generator. They won't hear you at all. The only way they'll know you're there is if they can see you or if they have spine chill. So what Tinker does is it lets you know where to try and go on the map to try and put pressure on generators. The thing is, 85% is really late into the generator repair. So a lot of times you'll try and go put pressure on the generator at 85%, but by the time you get there, it'll be finished. So you really can't be committing too much to Tinker unless you're a killer like Hillbilly, maybe Nurse, and like Freddy, where you can get to that generator very quickly. It usually isn't the best perk in those situations, so definitely one to keep in mind, but not commit too much to. Next up, we have Unrelenting. This is a perk that helps out against newer killers, or sorry, for newer killers as well. What it does is whenever you miss an attack, it'll make the cooldown from that miss attack down be 30% faster. So essentially, if you happen to miss a swing because somebody, for example, 360s you, then you can get right back on them 30% faster than what you normally would. Now, something to keep in mind with Unrelenting, though, is you have to remember that it doesn't actually apply if you hit something. So sometimes you might hit, or you might swing, miss, and you'll hit a wall, for example. If you hit that wall, Unrelenting won't apply. So if you're going to be running Unrelenting, you need to make sure that you're doing your best not to hit actual objects or walls. Now, Whispers. This is a pretty complex perk, and it's definitely one of the better ones killers have when it comes to tracking. What Whispers does is it makes it so that whenever a survivor is within 32 meters of you, it doesn't matter what direction they're in. If they're within 32 meters of you, period, the Whispers will turn on. This applies to survivors on the hook, on the ground, even while they're getting sacrificed into the sky. They'll still trigger Whispers all the way up until you see the little skull pop up in the bottom left. But what Whispers does is it lets you can kind of abuse the way Whispers works to your advantage. So Whispers looks for a radius, or it looks for people within 32 meters of you in a radius. So if they're 32 meters straight ahead of you, it'll light up just the same as if they were 32 meters to the back left of you. So what you can do is you can approach tiles, or you can approach areas of the map from a certain angle, and depending on how you approach, you can know that, hey, they're probably in this semicircle ahead of me, this semicircle 32 meters ahead of me. And if you're approaching like a corner of the map, for example, you can try and cut off part of that 32 meters, and you'll know like, hey, to my right of these 32 meters, that's just a wall and then outside of the map. So they have to be within these 32 meters to my left. That's somewhere. So what it does is it lets you know where survivors are on the map. It lets you know what areas you have to press for and what areas you should avoid. This is really good against stealthy survivors, for example, because if you have a group of 4 stealthy survivors and they're doing a really good job of hiding from you, Whispers will let you know that, hey, they're not in this area at all. Just stop chasing here. And I should probably mention the way Whispers works. Whenever you are within 32 meters, it'll light up in the bottom right, and you'll start hearing like groans and whispers coming in. Of course, that's where the name comes from. But generally, most killers will look in the bottom right to see when Whispers lights up and when it turns off. When it turns off, that means there's nobody within 32 meters of you. So if you're going into an area that you think somebody might be hiding in, and you see Whispers turn off, you can just immediately turn around and you'll know, because you'll know that, hey, there's nobody in this area, there's nobody within 32 meters of me where I think they might be hiding, so I can go check somebody somewhere else. Bamboozle. This is a perk that on paper sounds amazing. It blocks off a window for 16 seconds, and you can vault 15% faster. That just sounds great. It sounds like it would be really strong, but it doesn't really come into play that often. There aren't really that many windows on the maps that when you block them off, it'll completely screw a survivor. You might be able to get use out of it on the killer's shack if the pallet is down already, maybe. Um, but well, that actually leads into what the main problem with Bamboozle is. It doesn't help you with the pallets at all. All it does is shut down one window. But if you shut down a window, a survivor can just run to a pallet or run to another window at another loop. So Bamboozle helps out on very specific maps where there's god windows, something like the Ironworks of Misery, something like the Rancid Abattoir, But especially with all these map changes that are going to be coming through soon enough, this perk just isn't really worth using. Beast of Prey. Man, this one's another bad one. You'll notice that there are a lot of bad killer perks. Um, I haven't necessarily been mentioning them all. I haven't necessarily been mentioning that they're bad, but you might be able to tell from what they do, they just aren't that strong. Something like Unrelenting isn't good for a good killer because a good killer won't be missing that many swings, for example. But that's neither here nor there. We're talking about Beast of Prey. What Beast of Prey does is whenever you've been in a chase for 15 seconds, you'll get what's called Bloodlust Tier 1. That just makes you move a little faster. That's a mechanic that the devs implemented to try and help counter infinites. So whenever you've been in a chase for a certain amount of time, you'll get that Bloodlust. So whenever you have Bloodlust, it makes you undetectable as a killer. And you might think, oh, that's pretty nice. I've been chasing a survivor for 15 seconds. I got Bloodlust 1, meaning that I have no heartbeat range, I have no red light. This could be useful on certain killers, some of the shorter killers like Freddy, like Pig, like Legion, because they do lose the red light. So that means that they can mind game a lot better because the survivor won't know what direction they're facing whatsoever. But at the same time, you can do the same kind of mind games with your red light if you moonwalk as a killer. If you turn around and walk backwards and then like turn back to face the way you want to go, just to make the survivor think that you're facing the other direction. So Beast of Prey unfortunately just isn't that helpful. It does give you more blood points in the Hunter category, but similar to Distressing, those are points in game. Those aren't points at the end of the game that you get stacked on top of the 32,000 max. Those are still within your 32,000 max points, so even running it for the blood points isn't that useful. Now, Corrupt Intervention. Plague comes with two amazing perks, one of them being Infectious Fright and the other being Corrupt Intervention. Corrupt Intervention, what it does is it takes the three generators furthest away from wherever you spawn. It doesn't matter where you've spawned. Just take the three generators that are absolutely furthest away from you and blocks them off for 120 seconds at the beginning of the game. That's it. That's all it does. And you might think, oh, that's not really the strongest effect. But what that does is it means that survivors have nothing to do for that 120 seconds if they try and stay in the area. A lot of survivors generally want to stay in the area where they spawn because they know if they go to the other side of the map from where they spawn, that's usually where the killer is. Now, coincidentally for the killer, hey, the three generators getting blocked off furthest away from you are generally where survivors are probably going to be spawning because survivors tend to spawn at the opposite side of the map from the killer or something like that. They tend to spawn far away from the killer so they have time to do whatever they need to before the killer can get to them. So what Corrupt Intervention does is it gives survivors two choices. They can either hide for that 120 seconds, which is 120 seconds that they're wasting that you can be chasing somebody else, you can be getting hooks, getting downs, whatever it may be. Maybe getting set up as Trapper or Hag, this is great on those setup killers because it makes it so that the survivors have less stuff to do while you're trying to set up. Or the other option survivors have is they can run away from these generators and go try and find a different one. So instead of having a total of 8 generators on the map, they'll only have 5 to do at the beginning of the map, meaning that as a killer, you're much more likely to run into a survivor earlier on, meaning that you can get into a chase faster, meaning that you can start putting pressure on the map, getting downs. You might get 2, 3 downs by the time Corrupt Intervention runs out if you have a solid start to your game, and that's a ton of value because Corrupt Intervention means those 3 generators are going to be completely new whenever they do get unlocked. So you have plenty of time to try and find a survivor and start building up pressure if you're in Corrupt Intervention. Like I said, this is a great perk on Trapper, on Huntress, on Hag, because those are killers that are either slow or need to get set up. It's great on Michael Myers as well because he needs to get out of tier 1 as quickly as possible. Corrupt makes it a lot easier for him because they can't stay at that side of the map completely opposite to where you are. Now next up, Deerstalker. Deerstalker is definitely a solid perk. It's not in the top tier or anywhere near it, in my opinion. I'd say it's probably a C tier if I had to give it a rating. Now, what Deerstalker does is whenever somebody's on the ground and you're within 36 meters away, or you're within 36 meters of them, it'll just show you where they are on the ground, and that's all it does. Now, that's great if you're trying to go for a bit of a slugging play style. If you have perks, for example, like Infectious Fright, like Hex the Third Seal, and you want to be keeping people on the ground, Deerstalker just helps you find them a lot easier. But at the same time, that's all this perk does. It's not bad inherently, but it can be replaced by much better things. You can listen for survivors on the ground usually, unless of course their audio is bugged out and they're not making any noise. Excuse me, and they're not making any noise on the ground. Then you know that's fine. At the end of the day, if they're on the ground, that means pressure for you. But Deerstalker just kind of gets overshadowed by using your own ears. At the end of the day, if you can listen for a survivor on the ground, then you don't necessarily need Deerstalker, and it's just taking up a perk slot you could be using for something else, really. Now, Discordance. This is the best perk from Legion, 100%. Easily the best perk from Legion. This is actually one of the few perks that is actually better at tier 1 than tier 3. Right now, it's kind of backwards the way the tiers work for Discordance. Um, at tier 1, whenever whenever two survivors get on a generator, that generator will make a bit of an explosion noise and will be highlighted yellow, similar to surveillance, for 12 seconds. Or sorry, for 6 seconds. Now you might think, hey, Angels, 12 seconds at tier 3 sounds better than 6 seconds at tier 1. But the thing is, this perk refreshes every 12 seconds or 6 seconds, depending on what you have the perk at. So if two survivors tap a generator and then leave, when you have it at tier 3, that'll be 12 seconds that you'll be thinking, hey, they've both been on generator this whole time. Whereas they could have been on it for a couple seconds and realize, hey, we should go do something else. Whereas if you have Discordance at tier 1, you'll know right away at 6 seconds that, hey, they're not on this generator anymore. I don't have to worry as much about it. But regardless of that, Discordance is great because it helps you provide a lot of pressure in the right places. It's similar to Thrilling Tremors, in which it lets you know where to go to help put pressure on survivors. But a bit of a side effect for Discordance is the fact that if you're running an obsession perk, such as Save the Best for Last, such as Remember Me, and you want to know where the obsession is, if Discordance activates while you have one of those perks active, you know, hey, I'm gonna come put pressure on this generator. Either these two guys are gonna be like there's a there's 50% chance that one of these guys is the obsession. So it's definitely a good perk. It's when it comes to trying to track where survivors are on the map. Now, probably going to be the last one for this video. Enduring is, again, it's a very good perk. It's the best hillbilly perk in my opinion. What it does is, whenever you get stunned by a pallet, it's 50% shorter. So honestly, it just looks like you look down and you look straight back up without having that stun timer when your killer is all dazed and stuff. And what this does is it makes it so you have no fear of pallets whatsoever. It just lets you basically run through them. It's faster to take a stun with Enduring than break the pallet right away than it is to dodge the pallet and then break it with Brutal Strength. Enduring's just a really good perk, and it combos with some other perks to go for very aggressive playstyles on certain